I am Daniel Likis, and welcome to Movie 101. Movie 101 is created to empower movies itself. And today, well, as usual, we're having a Safa Sunday.
Hello, everybody. How are you doing today? I hope you're having a fantastic day, afternoon, evening, whatever time zone you're in. I hope you're enjoying yourself and watching some pretty rockin' movies.
Yes, movies. Last episode, we talked about one of the legendary favorite director of Miss Purnell, Mr. Guy Ritchie.
Yes. And there's a new show on Netflix, Gentlemen, that is a Guy Ritchie show, and it's just been phenomenal too. So it's not a movie, it's a TV show, but it rocks some serious socks. So definitely check that out if you like Guy Ritchie and you like his style.
Definitely. So, Miss Burnell, what will be our topic today?
Oh, today we are talking about early Zack Snyder movies. I absolutely loved early Zack Snyder movies. Lately, I will be honest, in my opinion, some Zack Snyder movies have been pretty hit or miss. I'm looking at you, Rebel Moon. Not going to get into the drama of Rebel Moon today. That'll take an entire episode to go through, do a little retrospective on. But I love movies like he did like 300 and Watchmen, Man of Steel, some of these really cool ones, Sucker Punch. He's done some amazing things. So it's been really fun to go back and watch some of Zach's first movies and just bask in the glow of 300.
Lots of men. So, Miss Burnell, can
Lots
you
of body
describe?
paint in order to get all of those muscles
Yes.
looking really snatched. Yeah.
For sure. So, can you describe the journey of Mr. Zack to become a renowned director?
So, Zack Snyder started, he was born in America, so he's an American director. He started early on with doing some music videos and things like that. I think that's a fantastic way of being able to kind of get some chops in there, to experiment, to learn some things that you can't really, like, you can take risks in a music video that you cannot take in a feature film. That's just how it works, because it's a smaller media, because they're shorter bursts, because you're looking for things that really grip people and make them interested for a minute or two, maybe even 4 minutes, depending on the song. I mean, when you get into, 80s rock music, it's 17 minutes and you need, something to pan over a guitar solo. But for the most part, when you're doing music for, Morrissey, Soul Asylum, when you're doing music for ZZ Top, you've got songs that are about 5 minutes long. So you're looking at shorter form material that you can experiment on. I think he used that time personally. I think he used that time very well. I think he learned a lot of interesting tricks, and he started developing that sense of very graphic, snappy style, making sure all of these visuals pop with the audio. I think that's something that carried through to all of his movies. We've also seen, the work of other great directors where they started with commercials and music videos as well, like Ridley Scott. Ridley Scott started with commercials. And so you get that sense that when you learn how to keep things tight, when you learn how to kind of keep that short form, then usually that means that you can make some beauty on the screen. So his first actual feature film was a remake of Dawn of the Dead, which came out in 2004. And for all intents and purposes, it was a resounding success. He did a lot to revive that movie and to bring it back for another generation back in 2004 with ye now slightly going into middle-aged millennials, of which I am. But he did a fantastic job of that. It was written by James Gunn, directed by Zach. It starred Sarah Polley, who herself is a director. And for those of you who are Canadians, you will recognize the name Sarah Polley because she was in Road to Avonlea as the titular character. And she's been a Canadian sweetheart ever since. And she herself is just a powerhouse when it comes to directing and when it comes to getting people to look at certain things in a different light. But it also has Ving Rhames, Mekhi Phifer. You've got quite a good cast. You've got Jake Webb, you've got Ty Burrell, you've got some pretty good people in there for what's basically a zombie movie. You know, it was fast, it was very graphic, and I think it was the right kind of movie to accentuate his style of really epic visuals. You know, some directors like to, you know, show the performance of the actors in such a way where it's very fluid and very natural and very sort of realistic. You know, the dialogue is the biggest thing that they really accentuate on, and they kind of focus in on the dialogue and the way that conversations go. With Zack Snyder, it's more about those epic visuals. It's more about that almost comic book come to life. You smack in the face eye candy. I mean, in this case, it was zombies, so it's not candy, but, you know, it was still a lot of fun. So that was his start. He really started with the music videos, and then he went on to Dawn of the Dead. And then after that, his next massive feature was 300, one of my favorite movies of all time. I love it.
For
I love
sure.
it.
For sure.
Yeah.
So, Miss Bernal, what do you think the most challenging project of Mr. Zack?
Oh. Oh, there's a couple ways you could talk about this. Okay. One, you have the cacophony around the Justice League movie.
Yes.
That was a bit of a challenge. You know, we're talking Justice League, which came out, and then they ended up redoing the edit and everything like that, and having Zack Snyder's Justice League. I've seen both versions. I've seen the one cut and then the Justice League 4-hour cut that Zack Snyder did. My personal philosophy is, if there's a director's cut of a Zack Snyder's film, I will watch that. I'll watch the longer material because that's closer, I believe, to Zack's actual vision. I just don't understand now why they're not just putting that out there, you know, for something like Justice League. The Justice League originally was fun. You know, it was like, okay, you know, all right, it existed. It was like, okay, that's a comic book movie. I can see that. I could see the slight darkness that he brought to the DC universe, something that, you know, I think went a little too far, but I also think it was necessary to kind of really separate it out from Marvel, because the Marvel movies are so bright and colorful and prime colors and just, you know, fun, you know, and all this kind of stuff with a few dramatic moments sprinkled in. They needed to do something different with the DC cinematic universe in order to really make it stand. But I will say, watching Zack Snyder's Justice League and not having this sort of non sequitur story of a family in a different country kind of going about, kind of taking that part away and spending more time with the actual characters, lengthening things out. I thought it was a much more powerful event. I'm calling it an event, not a movie, because it's over 4 hours long. We watched it in basically episodes. You know, my spouse and I, we got the popcorn ready, realized, oh, we are only an hour and a half into this. Should we do it tomorrow? Yeah, okay, here we go. So we watched it over a series of days, but it was worth it. It was
Yes.
incredibly worth it to watch the Zack Snyder Justice League cut. It's just, you know, from everything that was happening behind the scenes and everything that was going on with this cut and that cut and the whole thing, I think it was probably his most complicated one. But I would say a very successful piece of cinema. You know, I quite enjoyed it. But I also really liked Man of Steel because I viewed it not like a comic book movie. I viewed it more as a sort of dramatic piece about what do you do with heroism and what do you do when you're up against, you know, a foe that you can't defeat overwhelmingly. You know, you barely defeat that person. I think that showed a lot of nerve to put Superman in that position, because we don't often see Superman in that position. He's
Yes.
Superman. He's a meme.
Man of Steel.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you compare Miss Burnell, Justice League to Avenger, what the big difference?
Oh, I would say number one, they had way more movies to build people up into figuring out who these characters are before they did the Avengers movies with Marvel. with early Marvel Cinematic Universe, which was incredibly successful. You had the Iron Man movies, you had Captain America, you had Thor, you had, Guardians of the Galaxy going off on the side, but you had all of these movies, before things actually went down. I mean, we also had the Hulk, but again, there's a little bit of, things that went on with both Hulk movies before, Avengers came out. But oh my goodness, you had time to fall in love with most of those characters. And then the characters that you hadn't really met yet, you had enough of a cameo or enough of a glimpse that you were able to attach to them too. I think that was the smartest part of what Marvel did. They first laid the bedrock of let's endear people to these characters, whether it's Tony Stark, played excellently, basically perfectly. Robert Downey Jr. was perfect as Tony Stark. That was the best casting I've ever seen. And he imbued the role with such energy and he was the douchebag that you fell in love with. You're like, oh my goodness, you really are terrible. But your heart, you want to be in the right place. You just don't know how yet. And then you saw Tony Stark grow and grow and grow and grow. And you were like, okay, there's something to this guy. I actually really like him. Captain America, sweetheart from the time he's, all of 5 feet tall, tried to go up against, bullies in the streets. You fall in love with him immediately. You fall in love with his down-home American personality. Thor, Chris Hemsworth did a fantastic job of showing the egotism, this larger-than-life character of Thor. Kenneth Branagh was the director of the original Thor movie, and I was like, oh, I wonder how that's going to go. Mr. Shakespeare is going to be, oh, no, it's perfect. Okay, great, we're good. Like, all right. And then humbling him, having that character development moment, and then giving us an Avengers movie. I think when you have that chance to see larger than life heroes be vulnerable people and grow, then you could fall in love with them. And then when you get to Avengers, you have this incredible thing in cinematic history that really blew the world away. When it comes to the Justice League, we had a few movies. There were a few things in the, DC cinematic universe. I'm not going to say there weren't. You've got Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice. You've got Man of Steel. You've got quite a few movies, that kind of peppered in. Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman was fantastic.
Yes.
But it didn't have that same grip. We were having too many introductions, I think, in the Justice League movie that we'd already had cameos of in other places that kind of gave us that save the cat moment with all of them. And I don't know if they potentially went a little bit too dark or they went a little bit too moody. I think, you can have a lot of darkness on, a scene, on the actual visuals. And when I say darkness, I mean actual shadow and very little light. And, it can be incredibly rich, but when you do it too much, it desaturates everything. And you end up just kind of getting lost in the shadow. And you're like, oh man, I can't even make any detail out. And then people lose the experience because visuals are the most important part of film. So I think that they kind of suffered a little bit from that. I quite liked the Justice League movies, but I was coming at it from somebody who loves to study film and not necessarily from somebody who loves comic books, although I am somebody who also reads comics, loves comics, actually developed one at one point in time. That project didn't go anywhere, but it's shelved for the future, so we might see a Safra Burnell comic in the future done in the Judge of Mystics world, but we'll see where that goes. But it was
Fun.
they just didn't have enough fun.
Yes. Looking forward for your comic book, Miss Bernal. Let's pursue that and stop procrastinating. Do it.
Once the novels are done, I gotta get the novels finished.
Ginun gagap first.
Yeah, I
Ginun
gotta get
gagap.
that out. I need to finish the Judge of Mystic saga, and then we've got the Waxwing radio drama, which is currently in development, and then I'll have some more time to be able to go back to the comics.
Oh yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So Miss Bernal, please do plug in your books and works.
All right, so everybody, I am not just somebody who absolutely adores film and who went to film school and who worked in the film industry for a little bit. I am also an author. I write cyberpunk and mythpunk literature, so basically some rebellious science fiction and rebellious fantasy literature. You can find me at safaburnell.com or safaburnell.ca. That is SAPHABURNELL.com or .ca. And you can read my novels, Neon Lieben, Char and Ash, Son of Abel, Book of Revels. You can read my novella, Whiskey and Sinner's Blood, which is closer to horror. Haha. It's a horror novella. Also in a myth punk vein, and you can read my poetry in Usurper Kings. I'm a best-selling author in the cyberpunk genre, and I would love it if you guys gave me a read. The audiobooks
Yes.
are coming, so they are actually in development right now. They're getting chapter by chapter. And if you want to test out my fiction to see whether or not you'd even like it, you can go to my Substack, usurperkings.substack.com. And on Substack, there is the first chapter of every one of my books that you can read for free, because I would love it if you guys read it. And then if that's your thing, great. I would love you to read my novels. If you read that and go, that's not my thing, great. I'm glad you did that before, grabbing the book. I'd rather make sure that it's your thing before you sit down to read it. Just, because everybody has things they like and don't like, and that's totally fine. You do you, I do I, and all together, if you find that you're like, oh yeah, I really like that, then I can give you a few more authors that would really rock your socks.
Definitely. Please do support Miss Ava Burnell, because if you support her, more books to come. And of course, we're looking for Ginunga Gap for this year.
Oh yeah, it is the final book of my Judge of Mystic saga quartet. And so
Yes.
I'm excited. I'm like, it's coming.
Yes. No, what is your favorite films of Mr. Zach and why?
Okay. I have to go with 300.
Mm.
I loved Wonder Woman. I loved the director's cut of Watchmen, which is another one I do desperately want to talk about. I also loved Man of Steel. I loved all three of those. I think for me, though, the one that's meant the most, and the one, one of the first purchases I ever made when I got an Apple computer and was on this is back in the day, the iTunes store, was
Mm.
300. I bought the movie. I had it on my iPod on this tiny little screen, just in case when I was out and about and I felt like watching a movie or I had some time to kill, I could watch 300. I loved it, not only because of obviously the eye candy. I mean, you've got Gerard Butler, Nina Hendley, you've got David Dunwich, you have early Michael Fassbender, Dominic West. You've got all of these incredible people. Vincent Reagan, just phenomenal people doing this film. And I mean, obviously, the whole thing is basically a bunch of really hot guys wearing leather bikinis going out there to do battle as Spartans. So anybody who knows me is like, oh, Spartans. Yeah, no, it's got everything. Okay, she's good. I love Hellene culture. I love classical mythology. I go into a lot of it. Ares, the god of war, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love, are in the Judge of Mystic saga. And there is a future project coming where I highlight the two of them specifically, and more about that on my website. You can take a look and take a gander. And so it hit at the right time. It hit at the right moment for me, and the visuals shocked me. I loved the style. I loved, the way that they portrayed it. But I also loved the history of the film. The 300 was a movie back in the 60s. They did a version of this story of, the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, which is a historic battle that I researched quite a bit, because as somebody who studies Hellene history, obviously I was going to study the history of Sparta and what that battle meant. And so the 1960s movie came out, obviously in the 1960s. That definitely was referenced in some of this, but that influenced Frank Miller, who did the graphic novel of the 300. And then now we have the 2006 kind of new generational representation of the 300 in this first movie. The sequel, it's going over to the side. No, just the sequel
No.
can be over there. But this one, oh my gosh, it is a delight of the eyes. We are getting color timing technology and different things that was fairly rare in the early 2000s. We started seeing it with Amélie and other movies, like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? You're getting more of the color timing kind of computer editing software. And you're getting into some of that early stuff that we were seeing kind of going from celluloid to digital, which was really fascinating for me. But also just every single frame is just delicious. You've got impactful visuals every single step of the way. I loved that. I loved that it felt like I was watching a graphic novel come to life. It felt gritty, just like Frank Miller's work is often gritty. The narrator was a fantastic thing to have over top. And I don't often say that in movies. It's difficult to have a movie nowadays with a narrator, but they did it very well. And it was just such a caricature. It was so surreal. I really love that too. I loved the surreal aspect of it because it felt like you were looking at scene by scene of a heavy metal version of Grecian friezes on top of a temple for Mars or a temple for Ares, depending if you're in the Roman or, Grecian era.
Yes.
There.
Yes. For sure.
So, so good.
So good, deliciously crafted.
Oh, yeah.
So, Miss Berna, what do you think the key elements that Mr. Zack filmed successful?
Definitely his ability to time visuals to the music. Obviously that's an editorial choice. Those are post-production things, timing shots, but having the mind to be able to think, okay, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to play it out this way. And then we're going to find the music and we're going to kind of put the music in to have these moments be absolutely spot on. Having that sense of motion in something which almost feels like a static comic book. You get that in Watchmen too. There's a sequence where they are burying someone and the American flag being snapped and different things like that. Like it's one of those things that are kind of embroiled in my brain. You've got such a strong sense of visual character. You cannot mistake a still from a Zack Snyder movie. It very much looks like it's a still from a Zack Snyder movie. It also looks like it could belong in a comic book, and it could just be pasted, boom, right there. Pick a second. For the most part, they're all going to be just wonderful visuals. There's very few transitional shots that are just kind of and the person walked to the other side of the room, and it was just, they needed to get there because that's where the MacGuffin was. No, everything seems very choreographed and very planned out. And I love that about Zack Snyder movies. Does it, sometimes mean that some of the acting at times might suffer a little? Maybe there could be a few times where the actor might not be able to really get into character. But I think it's worth it.
Yes, it's worth it. And Mr. Zack, thank you for your sharing your talent to the world. Thank you so much. But before we go on, Miss Bernal, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our fourth season with Chef Alessandro, one of the best specialty chef in one of the five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. Please do listen to our latest episode. We talk about one of Japanese favorite ingredients in their kitchen, dashi people. So please do listen. Food 101. So Miss
Delicious.
Bernal, yes, food 101. So Miss Bernal, what would be your advice for those aspiring filmmaker out there?
Experiment. Get out there, try different techniques, try different editing styles, try to find a style of your own. Don't necessarily copy the work of others, although sometimes doing a retrospective on somebody's work or saying, I really love this, and this from these directors, that does help. So you could watch movies, obviously, but experiment do some smaller things, do some, commercial sized films, start with some music videos and some shorter films, and figure out your style. Figure out how you can put your style and experimentation into a mode that the people within the genre that you want to be in can actually absorb. And I think that's another thing too, because I think, it's all well and good to say experiment on a smaller form. And I do mean that. You should have seen my early film school stuff. He said to experiment, and by golly, I did. I had kaleidoscope prisms that I had taken apart and rigged onto the camera lenses in order to fracture the screen and different things all in camera. I went nuts. Okay, my film school instructor was like, "Well, I told you to experiment and you did." I was like, "Yes, I did." He's like, "Okay, so you're a surrealist." I'm like, "Thank you." But it's all well and good to do that, but you also need to make sure that you can be understood. So it's very important in that experimentation process, in that process of kind of learning your style, learning where you fit, is learning what genre you're going to be in. Being an action adventure kind of action-packed director is a very different experience from directing Shakespeare for the most part. Being a dramatic sort of family drama, slow panning shots of somebody thinking by the lake as they're trying to decide whether or not they're going to walk back in the house and save their marriage. That's a very different kind of directing than somebody who is directing, say, a Bollywood feature or, something like a historical drama or a historical epic. And it's very rare that a director is going to be a multi-tool, that they're going to be able to do any project that's hoisted upon them and do them all equally well. So you're going to find that you have a niche, and that's okay to discover, because the audience for one niche don't necessarily translate to another niche. And I think this is one of the issues going on with Hollywood right now is there in some production companies, there have been a few flops going on where they're hiring directors who are perfectly good at doing what they do, but then they're giving them movies that are almost completely different genre-wise and audience expectation-wise than what that director has produced before. And you're relearning the wheel. You're relearning how to do certain things. Certain camera shots and dollies and cranes are not existent in certain kinds of cinema, but they are essential in others. And so you need to learn and experiment as you go, and you'll figure out whether or not you want to be very calculated and very image by image by image. Here's the storyboard. We are following this faithfully. Oh, this guy's out of frame. Let's do that again. We need another 7 takes to make sure that we get that shot so perfectly well that it fits the visuals. If you are that kind of director, or you're the kind of director that's like, okay, we've got 5 cameras. Let's shoot this scene. Here's the script. If you improv, great. Just make it believable. Getting to character and go. And you just kind of let magic happen because you've done all your preparation beforehand. There are different ways of approaching cinema and different kinds of scripts that work with those ways. So that is the first thing you need to learn about yourself before you can really get out there. And that too, making sure that if you have one specific kind of cinema in mind, like a Marvel style action movie, there's always going to be ebbs and flow in the market of how long that is actually going to be relevant before it needs to go away from the culture for a while and then come back. So you might have some time to kind of work on some other forms of development, but experiment with it, see where your style takes you, and then just live it. Be part of it. Go to the conferences, go and meet people, and go and don't be afraid to be a production assistant on a set to learn things from the people around you. Don't be afraid to take a smaller job in the film industry where it's the genre that you're hoping to get into, or a director that does a certain kind of thing and you want to learn from the experience. I mean, being on set is one of the best educations ever. Don't be afraid of having, back in film school, it was having both business cards. You have the one side of your pocket, you've got the business card where you call yourself, a producer and a director of independent film, and you hand it out being all like, yeah, I'm searching for funding for a film of mine. There's the other pocket where you're like, I'm an excellent runner. I do great in the costume department. Hire me to help out in wardrobe. You have both just to kind of be like, okay, depending on the situation, where are you going to go and how are you going to kind of get that hands-on practical knowledge?
Definitely. Very well said, Miss Bernal. And stop procrastinating, people. Go, go, go. If you have the talent to do movies, go for it. So, Miss Bernal, before we go on, let's shout out our listeners from Spain. Muchas gracias, Spain, because in Andalusia we got 24%, Catalonia, Castile de Leon, Madrid, Galicia, Canary Islands. Oh, I love the Canary Islands. Saint Martin. No, no, that's Caribbean. Castilla Mancha, Navarre, Valencia, Murcia, and a lot more places in Spain. Thank you. Muchas gracias, Spain, for supporting this podcast, because this podcast is created to empower movies people. So, Miss Bernal, what do you think, Mr. Zach, future film?
Well, unfortunately, we've had a couple of middling almost flops with Rebel Moon Part 1 and Part 2. And those were, according to the news that I was able to see, those were supposed to start an entire cinematic universe of their own. And it's looking like they're not hitting their marks. Not with viewership, not with ratings. They're both getting a 5.6 and a 5.2 on IMDb. That's out of 10. So it's not like, oh, 5 stars. No, that's out of 10. I was like 2.5, they're not necessarily getting the best reaction because unlike previous movies with Zack Snyder, they've been a bit lagging on the pacing and a bit less sensical in some of the plot holes and some of the things going on. And I think we're at this crossroads where you're only as good as your last film. And he needs Part 3 to ramp it up, bring the energy back, and clean out the damage done by Rebel Moon Part 1 and Part 2. He really needs to go for it. And I think, too, there was this question of, well, this is one cut. The other cut is going to be different. And we've heard that from a lot from Zack Snyder. We've heard a lot of the time that, you see the producer's cut, but then, if you get the director's cut, that's where you get the real, the realty, the real good, movie. And I have to admit that I've said that a lot in the past myself, because the director's cut of The Watchmen, one of my favorite movies, the director's cut of 300, one of my favorite movies, the director's cut of Man of Steel, amazingly excellent. The same thing with Ridley Scott. When I look at a Ridley Scott movie, I just wait for the director's cut to come out. I don't even, necessarily go and see the other one unless I'm doing an article or something about it or writing a review, because I'm waiting for the director's cut, because that's where Ridley's going to shine the most. Gladiator, the director's cut, it's one of the best movies of all time, and we've talked about it here on Movies 101 before, so you can go back and listen to us talk about Gladiator. And I think what needs to happen with Zack Snyder is that he needs to bring the pace back to that sensational, fast cut kind of powerhouse moment that he had in things like 300, where you're not sitting there waiting for something to happen. You're not kind of going through a 10-minute long scene where people are explaining their trauma. You are out there getting things done, getting these scenes down, having action. We don't need 20 minutes of somebody farming in a movie right now. We just don't need it. Although it's really interesting to see, farming happen. A lot of people don't know where their food comes from. So that obviously comes into a conversation in a completely different thing, like Food 101. Where does your food come from? How is it made? How's it grown? What happens, to make that dashi, which, Food 101, you're learning about dashi.
Yes.
What happens in order to make these things? Well, we don't need that in a film that's supposed to be a space opera, Star Wars-esque, sort of wham bam, let's get out there. We have some family tensions. We figure out some things that kind of shake us. But I think I would like to see Zach do a movie that was a bit tighter on time. And it goes back to that sort of fast pace that he had in his earlier days. I hope that happens because I would hate for Snyder to lose roles as a director. He's got such a good style.
Yes.
We just need to remember what made you great, Mr.
Yes.
Snyder. If you're watching
Yes.
this, the odds are you're not. But if you're watching this, Mr. Snyder, please remember what made, watching movies so fun. And maybe slowing down isn't the way. Maybe, there's the sense of time that you get in Snyder films. The sense of a moment being slowed down and then sped up. And you have these contractions and these huge kind of things. And he does it so well. But when you develop an entire set of movies around it and you make the cut so long that people have to sit there for, 6+ hours, it loses some of that effectiveness because that can't be all that there's there. Let's go.
Yes.
The pandemic is over. We don't all now have 6 hours in a day to watch a movie.
Yes.
Let's shorten it back up.
Definitely.
90 minutes. Let's go. That's my challenge to you. Although I don't think that you would take that challenge. But, Mr. Snyder, I challenge you to another movie in the same vein of fast action, luscious visuals, playing with that sense of time, 90 minutes, likable main characters. Go.
Go for it, Mr. Snyder, because we're looking forward for more movies to come. So, Miss Bernal, thank you for your time.
And thank you for yours.
Monica people, see you soon.